Hello everyone! Look what's still alive! My tulips. So if you are new here, I have been killing my tulips for the last 4 winters, trying to figure out what does and doesn't work to keep them alive in a container garden, because it is more difficult than you think and more difficult than if you're growing in the ground. Since I've finally figured out what's worked, at least for 1 winter, I'm going to share that with you today. I'm also going to go over what I've done in the past that has not worked, just so you can avoid those options. And then I will go through and talk about, was it worth it, what I did? Would I do it again? And then what I do with all of these tulips after they're done blooming. Now, the short answer to what I did that worked was basically, don't let water touch them ever, or as long as you possibly can. Because the main issue that I was having, and that you'll have a lot if you're container gardening, is that the soil stays too moist in the containers, and the water kind of just acts as a sponge that rots the bulbs over the winter. So that's been the main issue. And sometimes too, I've even had the bulbs stay in the raised beds over winter, start to poke up through the soil in early spring, and then stop growing. So even though they made it through winter just fine, we then had a bunch of spring rain that came and killed them before they could even flower, which is why I wanted to wait till they flowered to officially declare success. So let me go back the last few years, tell you what I have done, how I got to this point, and then I'll take you up close on the tulips that I have, talk about which ones they are or were supposed to be, and then what I did specifically, because I did things a little bit differently for this bed than I did for those 3 beds on the back border. So the very first year that I overwintered, I didn't even have this back deck set up. I had all of my bulbs on the front deck, and it worked. It was a fluke. I don't know if we had a dry winter or more mild winter, but I didn't cover anything. I just left them in the beds. I didn't water over winter, but I did water once they started to, again, pop through the soil. But it worked. So I thought leaving my bulbs uncovered in the beds would work. What didn't work that year was daffodil bulbs, which I still haven't gotten to grow, and I think I might be giving up, and anything that was in a smaller pot. So anything that's in a pot like this, those I will move down to the garage or keep in the greenhouse. I have had success doing that, but I wouldn't just leave them out uncovered. So the second year, I did the exact same thing. I left them uncovered in the raised beds, and I think I got maybe 10% of them to come up. Everything else was rotten. And I had seen videos in the past, specifically from Klaus Dalby. If you don't follow him, I'll link him down below because he does fantastic container spring bulb displays. He always covered his. He would water them in after planting and then cover. So what I did that year was to water them in when I planted them, because I think that was the first year that I had these raised beds. I put them in here, I put a tarp over them, and then as soon as I saw the grain poke through the soil, I took the tarp off. And that's when a bunch of rain came, and it was still pretty chilly, so the soil wasn't drying very quickly, and most of them still rotted, and that was even more heartbreaking because I'd gotten them through the winter, and then they died in early spring. So that brings us to last fall, and now this spring, because you do want to plant your tulips in the fall, or buy them pre-chilled, which I'll talk more about in just a second, but this is what I've gotten now this year, which is like a complete 180 from the past. So I planted them both in this bed and these beds in the fall. I did not water. Whatever moisture was in the potting mix, and there was barely any in this one, there was a little bit more in this one, and I didn't plant the day after it rained. I waited a couple days for the soil to be a little bit more dry, planted them, did not water them, and covered them. Those had a tarp on them, those had a greenhouse cover and a winter cover. Now, to avoid the issue of the previous year where they got too much rain in the spring even after they poked through, I did put tomato cages on here to lift the tarps up so that the plants could grow, but they wouldn't have to be exposed to the rain until they got, maybe they were about like 5 to 6 inches tall before I comfortably took off the covers. And here we are. So I'm really happy with this. I don't know if it's worth it. I'll talk about that in a little bit. I think there might be an easier solution for me, but I am going to take you up close now to this bed, those 3 beds, and tell you specifically what I did. So this bed here is my newest raised bed. I got this last fall. So the first thing I ever planted, and I guess the only thing I ever planted, was these tulip bulbs. Now I did plant the variety, well, it's Soul Array, and it was a blend, meaning multiple colors. But I think if you can see, these are all purple. I was wondering if maybe the first few would be purple and then the others would open and be different colors, but I'm pretty sure they're all purple. I'm still happy though, because all I care about is that they're alive. But I feel like with tulips, and also sometimes with dahlia tubers, what they say they are isn't necessarily what you ordered. So I still love them. I love the shape of them, but just be aware of that. Don't get your heart too set on a certain color in case that's not what it turns out to be. So this raised bed is a little bit different. I feel like there's more options I have with this. And if I was going to completely redo my deck with all new raised beds, which I'm not, I would probably get the cedar planters ones because they have so many options. So in the winter, I bought a winter cover that is made specifically for their different size beds. It's just like a black waterproof cover. I slid it over the top. There was a little hole, I think, for air in the top here, so I did have to prop it up so rain didn't get inside. But I left that on until early spring, when I came back out and I put this black frame on, which goes with a clear greenhouse cover, clear plastic greenhouse cover. So this frame would not normally be on the bed. I am going to leave it on the bed all year, I think. And the cover and the greenhouse do not come with the bed. They are separate. But for me and my tulips, it was definitely worth it. So I left the greenhouse cover on, and since it was clear, it was nice. I could actually see all of the tulips growing, which wasn't the case with my other beds. And so that just made me really happy to be able to see the growth as it was happening. So I absolutely love how this bed turned out. I also planted 200 tulip bulbs, which is the most that I planted in any single bed. So that's why it is so full. Now we'll head over to these 3 raised beds, which these are from the Charming Bench Company. I do like that they are a little bit lower because the flowers are protected from the wind by the wall. So these I planted tulips. I also planted crocus and snowdrops and daffodils, and I think you can see none of those came up. So all of the smaller bulbs, and for some reason daffodil bulbs, rot. So if I do this in the future, I'm only doing tulips. But here I did a few different varieties, but I think only one of them looks like it's supposed to, which is the Chinatown, the pink ones here. I'll show you some up-close images as well, but the pink ones with the white outline on the leaves, which I'm happy about because that was my favorite. And I had killed all of them that I got the previous year. So with these beds, the soil I would say was a little bit more damp. Again, just that's how it was when I planted a few days after it rained. But again, nothing that I would say was really considered wet. So I planted them, I did nothing, and then right after I planted, I covered with the tarp. I put tomato cages laying on their sides on the bed to keep the tarp propped up. I don't know if I have any photos of how these looked in the winter because they weren't pretty. If I do, I will put them in here. But if not, the tomato cages were just there to prop up the tarp so that the bulbs could grow a good amount before I had to take the tarp off. Now, I couldn't see what was happening, so I did have to come out and check repeatedly, which wasn't a huge issue, but it was just not quite as fun as being able to see them with the greenhouse. So if I do this again, I would use the plastic of a greenhouse. I have one off of Amazon, and put it over the top and use that to protect it from the rain. But here is a close-up of what I got using this method. I don't know if all of them came up. I definitely planted fewer. There were not 200 bulbs in each of these raised beds. So I'm sure some of them probably rotted, but I think I have a pretty good turnout of tulips. So even though I am very happy having living tulip bulbs, I don't know if it's completely worth it to do what I did versus the other option, which is going to your garden center or Home Depot in the early spring, buying pre-sprouted tulip bulbs. So they'll come in a container, a plastic nursery pot. They'll have a little bit of green poking out. They haven't flowered yet. I can just do that in the spring and plant them in the beds. So I'm leaning towards doing that for these 3 next year, just so I can completely fill them as much as these are filled. Because I do have the greenhouse for this raised bed, I think I will probably do what I did this past season. Hundreds of tulip bulbs, all put in here, and cover it up so that then I can watch in the spring with the greenhouse. But I just think the stress over trying to keep them alive over winter, checking on them repeatedly throughout the season, especially the ones that were covered with the tarp that I also had to weigh down to make sure that it didn't blow away in the winter. And then the last part that's kind of tipped me over into whether I'm going to plant all my bulbs again this fall is the spring weather. We don't really have consistent spring weather. It's been a bit more consistent this spring, but usually it bounces up and down from like 40s to 70s to even 80s. And it's even hotter up here because I'm on a rooftop deck, so the heat impacts my plants more, which is not great when you have plants that like cooler weather. So when we had the 80-degree day 2 or 3 days ago, it made a bunch of my flowers look sad and droopy, and the petals start to fall off almost immediately. So if I had this color in my garden for like 2 weeks consistently, 3 weeks consistently, I would definitely do this all myself again. But because it might just be a small stretch of time, weather dependent, I think I'm just going to go to the garden center. Is it more expensive? Yes, but it does save me time, and I'm not filling that much space. So for me, I would rather spend like $60 on pre-sprouted tulips than $60 on bulbs and just pop them in my garden and enjoy them right away. So that's what I'm thinking. Now, this is spring Bethany. Fall Bethany, who sees her garden getting emptied and is bored and wants to plant, might change her mind. But so far, that is what I am thinking. Now, let me tell you a little bit about what I do with all of these once they are done flowering. Now, ideally for your tulip bulbs, you can remove the flowers, but you want to leave the leaves on until they turn yellow and brown and start to die back, because the leaves are still photosynthesizing, they're still gathering energy for the bulb that is planted so that it has a better chance of flowering again next year. I do have good luck with my tulips flowering again in the ground, again, not in my containers. And in Chicago in general, it seems like our climate is pretty good for tulips coming back. Not all tulips come back every year, and sometimes not as high a percentage come back, but I do have pretty good rates of success. So you want to let the leaves turn brown, which might not look very pretty. And for me, in a small space, I need these beds before that happens. I wouldn't want to leave my tulip bulbs in here and just hope they grow again next year, because I do water so much during the summer. I'm assuming that would rot them, but I need this. So I will take the tulips out. I will take them downstairs, and what I've been doing so far is planting them in the parkway. So I will dig a hole, I will put the bulb and the leaves in just at the same depth as they were when I pulled them out of here. I let the leaves die down there, I cut them back, and I will put in a photo or video here of our parkway, but every single tulip you see was a tulip that did not die in my garden from the past 3-4 years. And there are some from the very first time when I had success that are blooming down there. So that's been again about 3 or 4 years that it's come back now. So you can do that. You can transplant them if you need the space. You can leave them in here and then cut the leaves back after they're dead and just plant on top if you do want to try that. Or you can just treat them as annuals and pull them. I know a lot of people do that, especially if you don't really have success with them coming back year after year. So whatever makes you happy, that's what I would recommend doing. Now, I do have a lot more tulips that are alive, and I don't know if I can fit them all in the parkway. So I even might just leave out a basket out front that says 3 tulip bulbs. And if anyone wants to take them and plant them in their yard or in their own containers, then they can. But that is the update on how I finally stopped killing, at least for one winter season, the tulips in my garden. And it has made me so happy to see the color out here. Again, I got a lot of joy even watching these grow, but still think I'm gonna just buy in the spring and plant these up and then just do the same thing I did with this bed last year. So we'll see. Things always change, but that right now is my plan. So let me know if you have any questions. I will say this is specific to my environment. If you have very dry winters, you probably won't have as much of an issue as I have had. So if you have anything that works that you've done in the past, let me know also in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video. Bye. Can I help you? What do you think of the tulips? Yeah, they are really pretty. I'm excited for you to hang out with me for another garden season.